deal with anxiety and depression as Christians? Is that something that we should struggle with if we follow Jesus? Can I experience joy even if I don't feel happy? These are great questions submitted by another listener, and I can't wait to dive in.
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
So the exact question submitted was this: Dear counselor, can you address those who struggle living and coping with forms of clinical depression and anxiety on a regular basis? And can you discuss the difference between joy and happiness? As I was thinking about this and preparing the episode, the first thing that came to mind was to remind us that anxiety and depression are not emotions, but rather an emotional state based on neurological response. A response to emotions primarily rooted in a place of feeling unloved, unwanted, or hopeless. Just because we feel anxious or depressed and experience that state often, we don't have to identify with them. The problem with identifying with an emotional state as a way of being is that it generally keeps us from working through the emotions, possibly releasing them as we understand them better. As a counselor, I prefer the wellness approach, which means that I kind of have a beef with the DSM. I don't think that it is a good idea to generally categorize people or issues since we are such complex human beings. I understand that it was created as a catalog of sorts to help professionals and to provide codes for billing, but I also think that making it available to the public was a bad idea, as it encourages people to analyze and diagnose themselves and one another to stay in those disordered states, instead of seeking professional help to find their way back to wellness. That being said, anxiety and depression are debilitating, and there isn't a step 1, 2, 3 formula to implement and you're healed. Instead, I encourage process and investigation. There's a reason you feel anxious and depressed. It's not who you are, but it's the result of very real things that have happened to you that have led you to feel unloved, unwanted, or hopeless. There's an overlap of these two states of anxiety and depression, but a simpler way to engage a complex experience is to consider the time and the space that they reflect. Let me explain. Anxiety is related to the fear of not being in control of your circumstances or not being able to work out a steady or stable state. It's largely located in the future of our mind. It's connected to internal questions of what if, and results in fortune telling and catastrophic thinking, and physiologically can make your brain and body respond in threat and uncertainty, which can be pretty scary. Whereas depression is a sense of hopelessness. It affects our motivation and mobility. But if you discover the source, it will generally be located over something unresolved or experienced in the past. Very often, clinical depression is tied to unresolved grief or deep grief that precipitates an ongoing dread of loss, usually subconsciously. It doesn't ask questions, but seeks to imprison us with absolutes such as you will fail and no one cares or it doesn't matter. And these are just to name a few. It's very often the shadow that hangs over life or a wet blanket of gloom and doom that relates every bad thing that has happened as a future eventuality. And you're stuck. I realize the listener who asked the question is probably very familiar with these things, but I wanted to help us all understand these experiences better because I think that's where the misconceptions and judgment can interrupt grace and kindness and also gain access to false information. The problem I have as a clinician is that a diagnosis can very often keep us from exploring our way out of these experiences. For instance, if I say I struggle with depression, and yes, I once did myself, then anytime I hit a slump, a lack of motivation or deep sadness, I can just attribute it to being depressed and remain unmoved. But if I acknowledge that it's a state of being that can be explored, I might look deeper into the nuances of depression and my patterns to challenge them and shorten the amount of time that I'm in that state. Now, again, this isn't a judgment, it's an explanation. We realize that the body and mind are complex, and any number of external factors and internal factors can inhibit and influence our mental, physiological, and emotional state. And we should explore those things. For instance, it's pretty common for a woman who's had a traumatic birth experience to develop postpartum depression. Their body and brain are still in fight, flight, or freeze, and at the same time responsible for another human being to defend and protect, and very often feel the need to protect them from themselves and those closest to them. It's a survival mechanism, and it needs to be shown grace and provision instead of dismissed or invalidated. As Christians, we absolutely can and will struggle with these things. And we have a culture of social media and consumption that fuels the emotions that deepen these experiences. Romans 8:28 tells us that we don't have to conform to the patterns of the world, which can include our own internal world of understanding, but yet we can be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And then it gives the reason why that matters, because then you will see the will of God for your life, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. So a conformed mind can't see the will of God as good or pleasing. It waits in fear, it perceives threat, and it doesn't trust that there is goodness on the other side of whatever they've experienced. Sounds like anxiety and depression, doesn't it? So how do we renew our minds? There are two ways that open us up to do that. And let me just add, medication isn't sinful. There were several stints in my life where medication was a necessity. But if we aren't careful, we can become dependent on it and resist treatment to explore and not remain stuck long term. Here are a few ways I've found that can help us work through depressive and anxious states, even while on medication. First, we have to deal with the past, the space and time that fuels depression. Where was I injured that has led me to believe the things that hold me back from goodness? What happened? For me, my depression was largely rooted in feeling unwanted and unloved. My trauma, and then consequential loss of relationships throughout my life, left me feeling alone and unseen very often. Anytime something would hit that button in my heart, my body and brain would respond and shut down. Then anxiety would kick in, hurtling me into the future. What if no one loves me and I never have another relationship? And this would make me hypervigilant to the people around me. And I guess I could say that I would have a manic response in the sense that I would put on a show and be overly engaging and entertaining to those around me in the hopes that someone would see me and not abandon me yet again. Seeing this cycle helped me to make my way out of it. And this didn't happen overnight. And the feelings related still surface from time to time. But my awareness of why it's operating empowers me to renew my mind back into the exceptions of that experience, to negate the messages my brain is sending me. Remember, we talked about this in that space of attraction in a previous episode, but the same truth applies. Just because my brain is sending me a message of self-protection and defense doesn't mean that it's being truthful and I have to obey it. And that's the second thing that we need to do to work through anxiety and depression. We need to ask ourselves what is true about our circumstances and where those exceptions might exist. Simply put, what am I believing about myself, God, or others, or life in this moment? And is it actually true? Or can I see spaces where that belief doesn't fit? Can I apply that to this situation? Am I thinking or feeling something connected to the past that isn't fully operating in this moment? This will move the brain into solution and exploration and out of inference and threatening messages. The third thing that we can do is challenge our minds in a space of gratitude. I'm not saying to reframe the bad things as good. That isn't truthful. Rather, despite the painful things that have happened in my life, and some of you have experienced an extreme amount of painful loss and traumatic experiences, but asking ourselves, what can I see presently that is good? It's a challenge. And it can start really small, like the feel of a cat's whisker on my cheek, or the sound of rain outside, or the warm blanket that covers my head. Neuroscience proves that you cannot simultaneously be fearful and grateful at the same time. Do an exercise with me. I want you to close your eyes and think about something that you're worried about, that has you uneasy and afraid. Got it? Now think about the last good thing that happened to you, the face of a loved one, where God has shown up. What happened? Did you just feel that? The thoughts don't branch deeper. You literally feel this internal shift of walking in one direction with one set of thoughts, and your brain having you move in the opposite direction to think on what is good, pleasing, and perfect. I think that is so cool. So if you think about that and you intentionally move yourself into it, you will get stronger and more resilient in your thought patterns, which will support you in shifting out of that emotional state more readily. Philippians 4:8 says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." So the final thing that we can do to help in that space of anxiety and depression is to acknowledge God and ask for His perception and His intervention in whatever has us anxious. We can do that because we've explored the emotions, considered our thoughts, and reoriented them to things that bring gratitude, aka renewing the mind, which opens us up to trust God, receive His peace that exists outside of our circumstances, to act on our behalf, and to guard our hearts and minds, the mind that is actively being renewed. Again, we aren't cutting emotions off or devaluing our experiences with the intense feelings of fear and sadness. Instead, we're exploring them, which is where the last part of the question comes in about happiness and joy. When we cut off big emotions on any spectrum, it limits our experience of other big emotions and experiences. And joy is the primary one. There's so much that I can say about joy, but it's deep-seated. And if you have a moment, go watch Inside Out, because they bring to life the idea of joy and its collaboration with sadness and emotions better than anything else I've ever read or seen. The truth is that joy can encounter and interact with all other emotions, and it isn't limited by anything but the choice to suppress. Happiness is temporary, and it pushes away at the other emotions and sees them as threatening, whereas joy can be disgusted, afraid, sad, angry. The best way to describe this is through childbirth. I know that not everyone will be able to relate to this, but it's the best example I can share where all of those emotions coexist. In childbirth, there's quite a bit of fear. It's a big thing that's happening, new life, new experience, so many unknowns. And that fear can bring anger in my circumstances, a rude nurse, a delayed doctor, a loud breather in the room. Also, sadness can exist. My life is about to radically shift. And what was normal for my husband and I and the time that we had uninterrupted is about to be rare. And underneath all of this, at the core of my being, guiding the full experience, is when that baby arrives. And the joy and the light that fills the room, even if for the smallest second, takes your breath away. Happiness can be shallow and fleeting. I can laugh and not feel it internally. I can smile and my heart not respond. Joy is deeper than your circumstances. It goes beyond what we experience in the moment to the hope and expectation of what is eternal and wide. Depression and anxiety can interrupt your happiness, no doubt, but the exploration of it, the investigation of gratitude and exceptions and the movement out of the past and the future back into the present, that can inspire joy, or at least it has, for myself and a number of clients through the years. And if you haven't taken the journey, I encourage you to start today. Maybe that feels overwhelming to do alone, and that's okay. There's a world of helpers, professional and personal, that want to support you in moving through it in a more constructive and life-giving way. So with all that being said, thank you, listener. And I hope you found something in this episode to support you in healing and that you feel seen and heard in your struggle. We can't expect things to change overnight, but over time, we can experience less and less depression and anxiety. To be honest, guys, this is one of my favorite series that I've yet to do. And we still have one other question to address. So join us next time when we dive back into deliverance and healing and what it is to acknowledge both the spiritual and physical needs of others and ourselves. Until then, you can hear what I've already said in that space in The Difference Between Healing and Dealing, episode 26. Or you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook or email me at the address in the show notes and join our email list. Also, please help others find us and drop me a rating, comment, or like, and leave a review if possible, wherever you found this show. I'm always so grateful to share this space with you. And until next time, keep healing.